Hello there. Today we're going to be covering the fundamentals of playing healer in Final Fantasy XIV. Earlier videos in this beginner's guide series provide a foundation for these rock guide videos, so if you don't know your GCDs from your oGCDs, you may find checking out the first video of this series useful. With that being said, let's get underway. At its core, healing is pretty straightforward in FF14. Fundamentally, one needs to stop people from dying using heals, shields and mir, and then if nobody is dying, revive any dead people so that they can get back in the fight, and then if nobody is dying and there's no dead people, do damage. Where you get skill expression in the role is figuring how to do the first two priorities efficiently so that you can spend as much time doing the final priority, that is, doing damage. A useful idea to understand with regards to keeping people alive, particularly tanks in dungeons, is the concept of throughput. Surviving damage is essentially a balancing act of two throughputs. On one side of the scale you have incoming damage, and on the other you have incoming healing. If, on average, these are equal, people will survive. If, however, there is an imbalance in favour of incoming damage, people will eventually die. As a healer, you are most able to affect the healing side of this equation. Tanks, with their mitigation toolkits, are able to mostly affect the incoming damage side. DPS are able to influence how long you have to keep this whole balancing act going, since once enemies are dead, there is no incoming damage. In dungeons, you want to get a feel for how much incoming damage there is on the tank during trash pulls. How much you will need to heal will depend heavily on how many enemies the tank pulls, how good both your gear and the tank's gear is, and whether they use mitigation well. Having some measure of this flow of damage is important for knowing when to heal, particularly at early levels where all of your heals have cast times. Healing a tank when they are near full risks wasting a bunch of healing due to overhealing, since you can only heal to their maximum health, right? But leaving it too late might mean that they die before the heal even goes off. A good rule of thumb for when you are first starting out healing, assuming that gear isn't too awful and that the tank presses some mit, is to heal the tank when they are about 2/3 health. This is on the safe side without being too wasteful. As you get more confident in the role, you can lower that threshold as you deem it appropriate. It is also safer to use a lower threshold as you level and get more reactive tools such as oGCDs that apply immediately. Next up, let's talk about the core toolkits that healers have. Healers are categorised into two groups, with White Mage and Astra being considered pure healers, and Scholar and Sage being considered barrier healers. In principle, pure healers have more outright healing throughput, whereas barrier healers have more in the way of shielding and mitigation to prevent damage in the first place. Looking at the common core toolkits that these healers share, the main distinction is that pure healers get some regen GCDs, whereas barrier healers get some shield GCDs. This is why you'll often hear them referred to as regen healers and shield healers. The core toolkit of healers comprises an early level small target single heal for 400 MP, and then at a later level, roughly level 30, and a more expensive but significantly more powerful single heal. A single target heal over time, which for pure healers is in the form of a 400 MP regen GCD, whereas for shield healers it's a form of passive healing, for Scholar it's their fairy, for Sage it's Cardia. Healers also get an expensive AoE GCD with a regen attached for pure healers and a shield for shield healers. Everyone apart from Scholar also gets access to a weaker pure heal AoE. And finally, healers get a resurrect with a long cast time, by default 8 seconds. With regards to their damaging toolkits, each healer gets a dot, a single target spell with a 1.5 second cast time, and an AoE spell. These form a foundation that you can fall back on. Most of these healing tools are GCD spells, which means that there is an opportunity cost to using them, since if you're casting a GCD heal, you are not casting a damaging GCD. As such, the use of these is often referred to as GCD healing or using a GCD. The ideal for healers is to keep everyone alive whilst maximising damage, and this is best achieved by minimising GCD healing. At early levels, you will do a lot more spamming of GCD heals as you simply do not have any better alternatives. But as you level and your toolkit expands, you will have far more options to heal without having to spend a GCD. As an example, White Mage gets the ability Tetragrammaton at level 60, which is the same as the healing potency for Cure 2, but is on an oGCD. So it would generally be better to weave Tetragrammaton between damaging GCDs to heal than it would be to replace a damaging GCD with a cast of Cure 2. It is also worth noting that AoE oGCDs can also be used as additional healing for tanks in dungeon pools. So, as an example, Scholar's Whispering Dawn can be used as an additional small regen, even at low levels. Healers are casters, so it's probably worth discussing how casting actually functions in this game. For the most part, it is fairly straightforward. For spells with a cast time, you must be still until the cast is finished. Such casts can be interrupted and thus cancelled by either getting hit with certain attacks or by moving, whether by your own volition or by a knockback or drawing effect. You can also deliberately cancel a cast by pressing the escape key. The GCD recast timer starts ticking as soon as you begin casting, but if a cast is cancelled, it will reset and you'll be able to try casting again immediately. The only slight quirk to learn with casting in FF14 is slidecasting. There is a disconnect between when the game considers a cast to have finished and the cast bar being full. There is a window towards the tail end of a cast where you can move and the spell is considered locked in. This will mean that moving doesn't interrupt the cast. This window is usually in the region of about 0.5 seconds, but it does increase with ping. There are a couple of tricks you can use to tell when a spell has locked in. One trick is to pin an emote to a hotbar. It will grey out when you're casting but light back up when the cast is considered locked in. Another method is you can see when the mana is spent for the spell in question. Over time, you'll eventually just get a feel for your own slidecasting window. The value of slidecasting is that it massively increases your mobility. Let's take a basic damaging spell like Glare. It has 1.5 seconds of cast time and a recast time of 2.5 seconds, meaning 1 second of movement for every cast. If you use slidecasting though, you have an additional 0.5-ish seconds per cast, bringing the movement time up to 1.5 seconds. So simply by slidecasting this spell, you increase your mobility by 50%. Along with sharing similar core toolkits to fall back on, healers also share a role action toolkit. Repose puts a single target to sleep. This is mostly used early level to sleep mobs in the overworld that you didn't mean to pull so that you can escape, but is pretty much useless in the vast majority of main content. I tend not to even have it bound on my hotbars. Asuna removes a debuff with a white line above it like this from a target player. It's rarely used, but it can be super important when it's needed, since it's sometimes used for instant death mechanics, so make sure you have it bound somewhere. Swift cast makes the next spell with the cast time instead have an instantaneous cast time. This can be useful for movement, but is primarily safe for resurrects on healer. Res casts are 8 seconds by default, but their recast time is 2.5. Using Swift cast skips the 8 seconds, meaning you don't have to stand still for 8 seconds, which can be difficult in a fight, and also means you only have to wait 2.5 seconds before casting your next spell. Another minor trick that could be useful for, especially at early levels, is if you don't think a heal is going to come out quickly enough, you can Swift cast rather than hard cast it. Lucid Dreaming helps refresh mana. If you press this on cooldown, you shouldn't have any mana issues outside of, dying or having to res the entire team. Surecast nullifies many knockbacks, which can be useful for making certain boss mechanics easier or ensuring a cast goes off. Rescue yoinks someone over to your position, which is mostly useful if you see someone positioned incorrectly for something and you want to save them. And finally, though not technically under the role action menu, is Limit Break, or LB for short. LB is a resource shared with the party, indicated by these 3 bars, meaning if someone else uses it, those bars get spent and you cannot use it. There are 3 tiers to Limit Break based on how many bars are filled. As a healer, you will only ever want to use the most powerful tier, LB3, when all bars are filled. The first 2 tiers give a mediocre heal, but Healer LB3 is arguably the most powerful button in the entire game. It instantly revives the entire party at full health and full mana. It can single-handedly recover a fight that has been going south quickly. There's not much more to discuss on the toolkit side of stuff without going into job specifics, which are reserved for their respective job guide videos. To round out this video, I'd like to cover some general tips and address some common mistakes that I see players make. The first tip, it can be useful to have a baseline knowledge of tank mitigations so that you can gauge whether your tank is using theirs effectively and adjust your healing accordingly. So for instance, if you see that the tank is using MIT poorly or just not using MIT, you might want to heal a bit more aggressively. Similarly, it is useful to have a passing knowledge of other healers' toolkits for 8-man content, so you know what they can do and decide how to use your own toolkit effectively. For a really simple example of this, if a tank uses an inrun and their health drops to like 1 HP or super low, and you have a white mage in your party, it probably makes sense for them to use Benediction to heal them to full, rather than using multiple heals instead. Another important thing to note, players do not necessarily need to be at full health at all times. There's only really 2 things that matter, right? There's the question of, is health trending downwards? Like, is the balance of throughputs trending health downwards? And will people survive the next bit of damage? Often when the party gets hit by a raid wide, it will be a while before the next one happens. It may simply be better to let the party heal slowly from efficient regens, as opposed to spending a bunch of resources to get people topped right now. It's also worth noting that players naturally regenerate health over time, so if you heal to full immediately, you're not letting that natural regen do any of the heavy lifting. Another helpful tip is that you can throw a shield or a regen on a tank before they pull enemies for a free buffer in health for when they start taking damage. If another player is hardcasting a Resurrect, you can see who they are targeting on the party list by seeing the number next to their cast bar. Looking at this can stop you from wasting your time trying to raise the same person. Now for a common mistake. Once you get your more powerful single target healing spell at level 30-ish, there is almost never a reason to use the weak 400 MP heal that you got at level 2. The people I most commonly see make this mistake are people coming from World of Warcraft, where mana management is an important skill for healers. They see that the 400 MP GCDs are more mana efficient and gravitate towards using them. I've even encountered people who have tried to argue it allows you to do more damage since it, quote, saves mana for damaging spells. Sometimes newer players also get baited by the traits Free Cure and Enhanced Benefic on White Mage and Astro respectively. There are several errors with the reasoning here. The first is that mana management is practically non-existent in Final Fantasy XIV. In much older iterations of the game, this used to be a thing but has long since been phased out. Job-specific healing toolkits don't tend to consume mana. If you are using your toolkit reasonably and pressing Lucid Dreaming on cooldown, mana is unlikely to ever be an issue. The only healer in recent memory that had mana issues for any content was White Mage, specifically at level 50 for some of the Coils raid series. And this was addressed in patch 6.1 by literally halving the MP cost of White Mage's damaging spells at that level. Furthermore, these 400 MP GCDs are not even the most mana efficient option. That would be the regen GCDs. So to explain how niche the use of these weak single target GCDs is, all of the following need to be true to justify their use. First, you have to have spent all of your job toolkit abilities. Second, your co-healer can't cover the necessary healing with their own stuff. Third, you are super low on mana. Fourth, you are unable to use a super ether to recover mana. Fifth, the tank needs healing right now so that a regen isn't going to be sufficient. And finally sixth, but they also don't need that much healing, where the low throughput of the weaker cast would be an issue. This is so many conditions that it essentially never occurs. Another common mistake is that powerful tools should be held for emergencies. This is similar to too good to use syndrome, where you wait for the perfect time to use a tool, and because it doesn't arise, you never end up using it. Aside from the fact that using these tools frequently in good rather than perfect situations is generally better, this mindset also fails to realise that sometimes the emergencies don't even happen in the first place if you use the tools earlier. Less experienced players often make this mistake with Healer LB3. They are too precious with it and try to manually res several people, which means they aren't casting heals, often resulting in more people dying, and then either a wipe happens or they have to use Limit Break anyways. Honestly, if there are like 3 people dead and you have LB3 up, just feel free to rip it. Speaking of Healer LB3, it has a heavy animation lock associated with it, meaning that the person that used it can't move themselves. They can, however, be forced moved to safety with Rescue. Rescue can also, if timed correctly, counteract knockbacks for other players, even those that normally can't be invulned. This can be useful if a player has, for instance, accidentally pressed it earlier when they didn't mean to and don't have it up, or someone's mispositioned on a knockback that they can't invuln. If there's one thing to take away from this guide, it is the priority mentioned at the start. As a healer, you want to primarily stop people from dying, then revive any dead people, and then do damage. Pretty much everything else in this video is either a cute little tip or guidance on how to do this efficiently so that you can do more damage. As a new player, you will probably be overly focused on healing to do the whole stop people from dying thing, which is perfectly normal and definitely preferable to focusing too much on damage. However, as you grow as a player and understand your job specific toolkit more, you will want to work towards healing more efficiently so that healing GCDs can be replaced with damaging GCDs. But always keep in mind that a great healer isn't one who does good damage. A great healer is one who does good damage whilst keeping their team alive. Hopefully this guide was useful to some of you new healers out there. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you think I missed anything or you have any of your own cool tips, leave a comment down below. Next up in this series, I'll be covering melee DPS, which is my main role, so look forward to that. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.